But there was a more radical idea to come: Americans as a new people for whom God had marked out a special role in human history. This came with another group, English Puritans, who landed on the cold coast of Massachusetts in the 17th century. The arrival of the Puritans was a truly mythic event. Mythic because it was meant to be. In the famous phrase of their leader, John Winthrop, they would build a city on a hill whose example would shine back across the Atlantic and reform the corrupt old world.
We must consider that we shall be as a city upon a hill. The eyes of all people are upon us. We shall be made a story and a byword through the world.
Winthrop spoke those words in mid-Atlantic on board the ship Arbella. He believed his flock had been chosen by God to begin a new phase of human history, a renewal of the story of Exodus. These men, and women too, were biblical fundamentalists. They imagined their leaders as Moses, as Abraham, as elected saints. They were the first to call themselves Americans, and the society they created has proved absolutely basic to the way Americans imagine themselves today. New people and the beginnings of a new architecture. The four-square old ship meeting house in Hingham could hold the whole community, 700 people. This is the oldest church in New England. It's also the last surviving Puritan meeting house. Its frame was raised by the people of Hingham in 3 days in the summer of 1681, and it opened for worship 6 months later. It came to be known as the Old Ship Meeting House. Why the name, nobody seems to know, except that people must have been reminded by the great structure of the roof with its massive timber beams of the inverted hull of a ship, an ark. There can't be many oaks left in Massachusetts today big enough to supply the timber for these huge king-post trusses. This is very pure architecture, as befits its purpose. How long were the ceremonies here?
They'd be here for 6 hours on a Sunday, in 2 sittings on very hard benches without backs. One can see in the mind's eye the women with small children here on their laps, the older people in the front, all of them centered on the Word. That's what was happening here. They came before a pulpit that would often have an eye painted on the front of it, which was God's omniscient eye watching them.
And this would be the only decoration in the church?
This would be very nearly it. They stripped away everything else, the stained glass words, all of them gone. It's interesting to see the light in this building. I was struck when I was in Wells Cathedral in England, where the Puritans had smashed the stained glass windows, and white glass remained, and there was a kind of intensity of that light, which one sees here. I think they wanted to see things clearly and directly. They wanted no intermediaries. There was a kind of seriousness and urgency about all of this, and it's made America what it is today.
These Puritans delighted in radical bareness. They would not tolerate graven images of God or the saints. Some of them must have felt sorry that New England had no Catholic icons for them to smash. Yet the meeting house does have its aesthetic. It exists to frame the spoken word, to which the visual image must forever defer. Simple gravestones were their only religious art and their only sculpture. Puritan society was fixated on death to a degree that modern Americans can hardly imagine. Today, we sweep death under the carpet. Then, it held the foreground of social life. At funerals, whole villages would get drunk and children were dragged snivelling to the edge of open graves to teach them that they too would die. The death's head on the stone reminded you that this world was only an anteroom to a real and eternal one, that its realities were insubstantial, its modest achievements all in vain. The Puritans were at least as superstitious as the Indians whose beliefs they scorned. In their world, nothing was accidental. Good was part of God's plan, evil was the result of diabolic conspiracy. They lived in a world of omens and portents. They were obsessed by witchcraft. This hysteria started in 1692 during the ministry of Parson Joseph Capon. His house still stands in the small village of Topsfield. He was one of the few to try and save those accused as agents of Satan in the famous Salem witchcraft trials. Parson Capon tried to remonstrate with the witch hunters at Salem, but he failed, and the women were all hanged. His house in Topsfield still stands, and it gives you, with these low ceilings and the heavy beams, a strong sense of the kind of world that these people were constructing for themselves, intimate and close-knit and designed to keep the family in and the wilderness out. Built in 1683, the Parson Capon house is probably the best surviving example of Jacobean architecture in America. Its brick chimney was a sign of affluence for the times. The door is double thickness, clinched with nails against Indian attack, and this hanging finial was one of the few ornamental touches. The Puritans didn't invent a severe domestic style to reflect a severe ideology. Many 17th century English houses looked like this. But in other parts of their culture, we do start to see the faint stirring of something that can be called American. Farmer Henry Treat made this chest in 1673 to commemorate his wedding anniversary. So this is really the sort of earliest form of American furniture, a six-board chest.
The six-board chest is really the dumbest piece of furniture known to man. It's so simple to make, and yet this shows an early emphasis, a kind of yearning to ornament and to embellish, even amongst people whose situation in life was very tenuous and insecure. This was a frontier community on the edge of the wilderness. It's one of the earliest pieces of American furniture and the earliest piece of Connecticut furniture with its date carved right on the front.
From the days when the West was in the East.
When the West was in the East, right.
Well, when you first see it, it looks like it's just about one notch up the evolutionary scale from a packing case, but what is it?
It's pretty much, I mean, it's simple. This is no backwoods Michelangelo here. It's pretty dumb carving, essentially, but it works, and it creates quite an elaborate effect to an otherwise remarkably simple piece of furniture. There seems to have been this kind of love-hate relationship with nature. One imagines the Puritans as sort of 17th century Daniel Boones at home in the wilderness. A truer picture is that they probably hated the wilderness. It was an oppressive presence on all sides of them, and when they were in their domestic environments, in their homes, they wanted evidence of control, of order, and of artifice, so that they took wood and rendered it colorful, carved, decorative, and even mathematically structured.
The only kind of painting the Puritans encouraged was portraiture. How did they see themselves? This is the only known Puritan self-portrait. It's a Boston mariner in the 1680s, Captain Thomas Smith. The lace at his throat tells you he is well off. The skull, that he accepts his impending death. Under the skull, the poem reads, why should I the world be minding, therein a world of evils finding, then farewell, world. Such portraits were made as a record, to commemorate a person's social place, to honour his memory after death, and to remind you of the transience of life. Some Puritan effigies, to put it mildly, lack the zing and suppleness of European portraiture. They're awkward shades of virtue, or else they're an index to wealth. These are the Freaks, a pair of New England yuppies in the 1670s. Mrs. Thomas Freak holds her baby, Mary. The nameless painter has done them in an old-fashioned Elizabethan style, flat and formal, but with every detail of lace and jewellery carefully listed. She's a trophy wife, and her minxy little face radiates delight in her status. Her husband, John Freak, a rich young Boston merchant, is just as grandly kitted out with his lace and gloves. Money was a sign of God's approval, so why not show it off? Thus, the Puritans left the first portraits of individual Americans. It is a mistake to think of the Puritans as conservatives. The truth is very nearly the opposite. They invented the idea of American newness, imagined as the sign of a special history. Newness underwrote the American Revolution, and it was the root of the long-lasting belief that Americans are a special case. But they believed in freedom for themselves, not for others. They were not very tolerant or democratic. The legacy of those admirable traits came more from other settlers who arrived in what is now Pennsylvania.